Like, how much are you going to get injured by someone or something, an institution, a relationship, before you say enough is enough? Greetings from beautiful and emotionally devastated Western New York on the morning after the Buffalo Bills have lost for the fourth time in a row to the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL playoffs. Last night was a particularly heart-rending loss on many levels, and it is really awful. And I explained to my 7-year-old daughter this morning, who didn't stay up to watch the game and, is only like sort of casually into football, but, she understands that I'm into it and her stepdad is into it. But I said, there are going to be a lot of people in this area who are so upset it's as if someone has died. And it took her a while to grasp that, and she did. I am not feeling nearly as bad as I thought I would. I was dead set against watching the game. Well, actually, that's not fair to say. I had convinced myself that I can't watch the game, knowing that the stress would be almost intolerable even if they won. Unless they somehow, the Bills had gotten so far ahead that the game was a blowout, which I knew was extremely unlikely. And it turned out that the stress was really, really bad, but it wasn't intolerable. And then when they lost, very close to the end of the game, when they came that close to winning again against this team, lost by, basically a hair's margin, I think I was in a little bit of shock because I'm like, well, I don't feel as bad as I expected. Woke up this morning with that sinking, awful feeling and woke up a few times in the middle of the night, as so often happens in these situations. And I'm not even the biggest Bills or even football fan. I just follow the commentary of sports more than I follow sports themselves. But I do follow the NFL, and I do, after living here in this area 35 years, have an emotional investment. Certainly not to the same degree that people who've grown up pouring their hearts into this team, certainly not to that same degree. But when I imagine the scenario, hypothetically, of the Bills winning the Super Bowl, I start to get choked up and I know I could burst into tears. So I do have a stake in this. But I feel worse for the players and the other fans. And part of the reason why that is, the reason I don't feel as bad as I expected, is because there were a number of things in last night's game that really convinced me and have me questioning and wanting to propose to you that it would be healthy for you to start questioning how much of yourself and your hope you want to pin on these professional sports outcomes where there are so many other hands in the pot. It's completely out of your hands. And how much you want to keep letting your well-being rest on terrible decisions by other people. So I want to back up to last year's loss when the Bills, again, were that close, knocking on the door, and lost to the same team. For those, who don't follow football, the Kansas City Chiefs are on a spectacularly dominant run right now. They are on the verge of three-peating, winning the Super Bowl 3 years in a row. They're going to the Super Bowl. They have to actually win the game. But if they do that, that has never been done before in the Super Bowl era. So that would be a beyond remarkable achievement. They also definitely have the chemistry and the mindset and the sort of juggernaut inner mechanism, like the psychological gears to they are winners, is what I'm trying to say. Like they remind me a lot of the New York Yankees in their prime, where there's just something about the aura of other teams coming to play them that other teams come in and end up defeating themselves. Obviously, their predecessors, the New England Patriots in the NFL, had the same quality. But last year's game, which I actually did not watch, I followed through on like sitting it out until a friend called me and said, "Hey, do you want to come to a bar? Do you want to, I'm at this bar in your neighborhood. Do you want to come check it out?" And I was like, okay, fine. And I, like an idiot, let myself be talked into going. And of course, that was really, really disappointing as well. And I walked away from that game feeling like, well, for whatever reason, our quote unquote, our quarterback, the Buffalo Bills quarterback, Josh Allen, who is just a phenomenal talent. I mean, just so beyond, almost like a Superman level physical specimen, and the spirit of his play is so engaging as well. But I walked away from that game because he made a questionable decision at the very end of the game that, had he decided differently, it looked like there was a clear shot at one of the receivers who has since left the team, at what was then their star receiver, Stephon Diggs, and thought he just doesn't have that clutch quality, that quality in his makeup, in his genes, in his bones, in his aura, in his, spiritual center to come through in these huge moments. There's something about him that's just not quite there. And by contrast, his opponent, the Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, absolutely has that quality. So I walked away from that game last year, and it was, you could feel the vibe in the bar just dip from hope to abject despair within minutes. Right? It was just like being almost at like a funeral or something with a bunch of other people. And I suppose that was better than being on my own with that. I'm not so sure. I still don't know. My jury's still out on that. And this is a year later. But I was like, look, I was asking myself the same questions as I am now. Is this healthy? Is this worth it? Putting so much of myself, my hope, in someone who may not, at the end of the day, have the ability to get over this hump for whatever reason, as likable and lovable as an athlete and as impressive, as what he does on the field is that something we have to accept? So we get to this year, the Bills come into the season, and the pundits are saying, well, they probably won't make the playoffs. They'll take a step back. Their window has closed. And not only do they have a great year, but Josh Allen steps up his game and for just about the entire season plays pretty much flawlessly in a way that he was not able to before. So it's like, whoa, okay. They've really stepped it up. And the first two rounds of the playoffs, they played well. I mean, they kind of, it was they were threatened last week, but they made it through. They prevailed. And then last night happens, and his play was shaky to start with. There were, you could tell his nerves. And I can't blame somebody for that. There's almost no way not to be unnerved and have jitters in moments like this. I mean, because he literally was playing for his legacy. And this defeat yesterday, I fear, will be his legacy, that he just never was able to beat this other guy. And that's really, really, really unfortunate. His career is not over by any means, but this was a legacy sealing game. This would have really helped him make his case and changed the narrative on him had he been able to win, even if he hadn't played that great, right? But the fact is, the Kansas City Chiefs own the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs. So where does that leave this fan base that is so understood throughout the entire sport as being one of the most loyal and vivacious, like really, really, really into their team? They tend to make donations to other teams' players. Like when the Bills beat other players, they'll make donations on behalf of that player who lost against the Bills for whatever charity that player likes to support. I mean, they do really classy things like that. The tailgate parties at Highmark Stadium in Orchard Park, New York, just outside of Buffalo, where they play, are legendary. I mean, this is a fan base that has just so much joy and energy, and just an incredible relationship with this team. Where does that leave these people who, by the way, as anyone who follows football even casually knows, already suffered multiple heartbreaks, 4 in a row, in fact. In the 90s, when the Bills made it to the Super Bowl 4 times and lost 4 times, which is like mind-boggling to think about. And actually, the loss to the Chiefs hasn't been 4 years in a row, but their last 4 meetings in the playoffs, the Chiefs have won all 4 times. So where does that leave everyone? Unfortunately, last night's game really cemented to me a number of things. The first thing is, and this has been ongoing for 2 decades at this point, there have been indicators, but last night was particularly blatant and egregious. The NFL is not invested in fairness when it comes to officiating the games. There were 2 calls in particular that were reviewed by NFL headquarters in New York that were so atrocious that stalled the Bills on critical drives. And it's like, and they gave the ball back to the Chiefs. It's like, okay, there have been murmurings of this with the Chiefs. There is a widespread idea out there that the Chiefs get favorable calls. There are people who counter back with the statistics and say, well, they've actually gotten fewer calls in their favor than their opponents. But then there are people who counter argue, well, it depends on when those calls are made. And when they're made in high leverage situations, they tend to decide games. Now, I am convinced this is true, especially like watching last night. You cannot argue, because I mean, it was so obvious. And so it's like, all right, we're watching a sport that, if it's not rigged, is the next closest thing, which means, this team is getting calls in its favor in moments that just break the backs of the other teams, who are already going into the situation playing on their back heel psychologically because this other team is now in such a groove of dominance that you can tell other teams have the yips a little bit. Although the Chiefs had a little bit of, as well. They fumbled, and I mean, there was a lot going on in this game, and it was such an amazing game on its own. But then you have the referees doing this. Now, there were certain calls that should have gone against the Bills that didn't, but these were really, really, really decisive. And here's the thing. This is unfair to the Chiefs as well, because I am not convinced that without those calls, they still wouldn't have won. In other words, I think even if the game had been called completely fairly, I'm not convinced Patrick Mahomes and their 2 coaches who are like considered top shelf in the game, their head coach Andy Reid and their defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, who, even through my rudimentary understanding, their ability to scheme and draw up game plans is matched by no one in the game, certainly not today. We don't know. I'm kind of like, well, the Bills could have won, but it is likely that triumvirate of people, the head coach, the defensive coordinator, and the quarterback, are so locked in terms of their will to win that they would have prevailed anyway. So not only is this a slap in the face to the team that loses and their fan base, it also undercuts the achievement that we're seeing. This Michael Jordan-esque streak that this team is now on. And I just find that so disgusting and unnecessary. I have a friend, a really, really close friend, who argued years ago that there's so much money in professional sports that it's naive to think the games aren't maybe not fixed, but tweaked. That in certain situations you can really affect the outcome of a game by calling it a certain way. And he has since come off that, which I find interesting. But I was convinced at the time, and I still think that's a completely reasonable thing to way of interpreting things, especially after last night. So you have that aspect. You also have, on top of the play, right, from the players, you have bad decision-making on the part of the Bills coaches, their head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. And I won't get into the nuts and bolts of that. That's not really something that I'm qualified to do. Although, I could sort of put certain aspects in lay person's terms. But even to me, and everybody I was watching with, and I was watching with a good friend of mine and his son's in high school and his son's friends, and like my friend's son and one of his friends are like, they're like young coaches in the making. I mean, they can really like grasp all the like complexities of the game and the ins and outs. And I would turn to one of them and be like, all right, coach, so what do we do? What do we do here in this situation? So that was really fun, but it was really apparent to all of us, including me, who has like maybe definitely the least understanding of football of anybody in the room other than my friend's wife and his daughters. So, you've got a sport where, okay, there's clear corruption, and I'm just going to call it that. I think to keep making the argument that, well, it's incompetence is just absolutely like you're refusing to see what's right there at this point after yesterday. And there have been indicators, like I said, going back 20 years or more, right? Going back to the famous Tuck rule game. There's been lots of this swirling around the sport, but it just seemed to go up a level. One example that I absolutely have to mention that's totally unforgettable. In 2019, the New Orleans Saints were playing in the NFC Championship Game, so the other conference's equivalent to last night's game that the Bills were playing. This was to advance to the Super Bowl, and there was a flagrant pass interference committed by the other team on the New Orleans receiver. I mean, the guy was like slammed, out of the play. And there was a referee right there and they didn't call it. And at the time, the NFL had the excuse, well, we can't review things. We don't have any way to like overturn these calls in the moment, blah, blah, blah. Now they do. Last night they did. And they didn't do that, which just goes to show that something is up here. At the time, I said, and I still firmly believe this, it is shocking to me that those referees got out of New Orleans alive, that they got out of that stadium, that there wasn't a riot. And it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt or killed. before we have a Luigi Mangione type moment where someone feels sufficiently motivated to take the life of an NFL referee or an executive who they feel is responsible for whatever suffering they've endured when these things happen and they're completely flagrant. When people have such an intensity of an emotional response to a sport, and you have millions of people wrapped up in this frenzy, and something like this happens, you're playing with fire if you don't take that seriously. If you bait people into like further and further and further levels of misery and of having some kind of breakdown from having their hearts broken. When in cases where, I'm not talking about the games, the outcome of the games and the play on the field. I'm talking about when the outcome is either the result of neglect or what appears to be outright tampering. And the league is just like, whoa, right? It's like, okay, now you're really, really, really pushing it. And when you get these mobs in these stadium situations, or you can even get one fan that takes this so personally that they would go to extremes. And my response is, I would understand it, even though it could end up being horrifically tragic, and you certainly wouldn't want somebody to like show up at a game and do something awful and shoot up the stands or something like that. I'm not talking about something like that. I'm talking about someone deciding that there is a worthy target of like, okay, you did this to us. I've got nothing else to live for, or I'm so wrapped up in this that I need some kind of sense of purpose, or the team was my sense of purpose or reason for living, and you've taken that away from me. And I mean, how can you not account for that? How can you sustain your business model off of the fanaticism of the people who buy into your sport, your customers, basically, right? And yet then turn around if one of them was to take all that passion and go down a really destructive path in the wake of something like this. I don't know that there's that many people that would feel bad. It would be another sort of Luigi Mangione moment, right? Where people are like, well, fuck it. You tempt fate enough, you dish it out, and eventually it's going to blow back on you. So I've been arguing that for the last 5+ years, and I just hold my breath every time something like this happens. I'm shocked it hasn't happened already. Right, especially when the call goes against a team in their home stadium. That's like, tens of thousands of people all crammed into this area, all angry and bitter and upset and outraged at once. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that wouldn't be. It would obviously be horrible, but you couldn't turn around after something like that if it did happen and say, whoa, we don't know how this happened. You're like, no, actually, you lit a fucking match around a gigantic canister of gasoline, like one of those big ones you pass on the highway with the stairs going around it. And you started like throwing matches into the motherfucker, and look what happened. And it blew up on you, right? We're on that track. Mark my words, I would bet money that something horrible, one of these officials or executives, is going to be the target of some violent act or attempted homicide or homicide at some point in the not too distant future. Because this cannot continue without some sort of reprisal from the people who are really bearing the brunt of it. Like, the NFL is engendering hatred where it should be and could be just generating all sorts of enthusiasm and support for its product. It just does not make any sense. Yes, I know there are economic incentives. I know there's another example. When the LA Rams played the Cincinnati Bengals in the Super Bowl just a couple of years back. The refs were not calling pass interference. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the game, mysteriously found their whistles, or their flags, they don't, right, and started throwing them. So you set a precedent and let the players know, okay, we're quote unquote letting them play is what they call it, right? And then you start penalizing people for things that they hadn't been penalized for before. I was dead convinced. Go back and look at that game, like towards the end. The calls that went against the Bengals. They were robbed of that game because my suspicion, and it doesn't take a fucking Sherlock Holmes to figure it out, the NFL had just opened a headquarters or was just about to open a new stadium in LA with a West Coast headquarters out in LA, and they wanted the Rams to represent that so they could sell luxury boxes at exorbitantly high prices to corporate interests in that new stadium. Right, as NFL business analyst Andrew Brandt, who for years worked in the Green Bay Packers front office. He has a podcast called Business of Sports, and he teaches on the business of sports. He's been saying for a long time that the revenue, the ticket sales, is not where the money's at with pro sports leagues anymore. You see the stands full and they want to give the appearance. Obviously, they want to show that people are into the games. But it's corporate money. It's cable money, right? That's what they're most interested in. So, they gave the Rams that Super Bowl. Now, obviously, they didn't contrive the Rams being good enough the whole season to get there, although you can make that argument this year for the Chiefs that they got many calls starting from the very first game this season that nudged their victories all along the way, right? So this is a thing. This is a real thing. And when does this backfire on them? Or when do they start feeling the impact in their wallets? When do you finally exhaust the equity you've built up with your customer base and they turn around and they're like, fuck this shit. We're not buying in anymore. Get the fuck out of here. Right? I mean, it's hard to imagine now because the popularity of the sport is so massive, but this is what perpetual growth and expansion does. It makes people blind and greedy and dumb and willing to cut their own, like the legs off the table that they're standing and gorging themselves on, right? That the whole thing falls on them and breaks their neck, as well it should. So you've got that. Then you've got something that I've thought about for years, especially in the context of sports, is that I just find that people are across the board, no matter how high achieving they are, tend to be addicted to bad self-defeating decisions. I should note that prior to the Chiefs head coach Andy Reid coming to Kansas City, the knock on him, he had not won a Super Bowl and he had knocked on the door several years in a row. The knock on him was that he just had this thing, this knack for shooting himself in the foot late in games with clock management. And the question around him was, well, we know he's great, but will he ever be able to win the big game? So, I mean, it's cool in a sense because I'm asking these questions about Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, but the coach of the Chiefs is a living testament to the fact that, yes, you can, late in your career, turn things around. Then again, a head coach has many, many, many more years to do this. Athletes, particularly an athlete as athletic as Josh Allen, who takes as much physical contact in his position, there's a window there, right? You might have another 10 years, maybe at most, right? And not all of that is going to be in his prime. But so you have the referees, the NFL itself being in on this, right? Because these calls went back to headquarters. And you have the mismatch in coaching and the decisions that are clearly inflicting harm. Like the team decision makers were inflicting harm on themselves last night. And then you have Josh Allen, who for whatever reason, whatever the energy around him just seems to come up slightly short. What was so hurtful about this game is that there were many moments where it seemed like the momentum was turning in the Bills' favor. I mean, there were so many, even right up pretty much until the very end. So many things that it seemed like, wow, like that intangible hand of destiny might be finally lifting them over this obstacle that seems insurmountable, right? Might be finally helping them slay this dragon. And it ended the way it ended. So that's the thing. It's like there's so many times the game got my hopes up. And that's for people that don't understand and who are like, well, I didn't care so much about a game. I just don't understand that. And I love how at this time of year, particularly around football leading up to the Super Bowl, you know, there are always people that have to broadcast and, well, why do you care that much about a stupid game? It's so dumb. It's like, well, I can explain why. You may not be into sports, but the hero's journey that sports represent is something that hits us on a gut level. We all need to feel that in our own lives we're on some sort of quest, or I would argue we need to feel that, right? That there's a resonance to that. There's a resonance to what these athletes go through, what they surmount to get to this, to climb this mountain, and be able to lift their arms up in victory. I think that's an extremely profound thing. And even though I'm going to say something in a little bit that seems to contradict this, I've had this debate with another really good friend of mine who once argued to me, and this guy is a sports fanatic. This is like my favorite person to go to talk about sports with. Just loves sports. And I remember years ago him saying to me, look, this is a no-brainer. Like issues of like shelter, like practical concerns, like shelter, war, things like that, politics are so much more important. Sports don't even compare to them. I'm like, what are you talking about? My response to that was, okay, so then why is it that the first things when societies experience turmoil, like war or famine or natural disaster, whatever, once they get that taken care of, the first things they go back to are culture. So sports, the arts, storytelling. Why is that such an important thing? Yes, of course, you know, you're not going to watch a football game if you're starving, right? Obviously, there's a primacy, there's a triaging to what your practical needs are. But I wouldn't be so quick to poo-poo that the fandom, like being a fan, putting your hope into a certain outcome and watching as you watch people scratch and claw to try to make it to the summit, I wouldn't poo-poo that, and I actually feel bad for people who don't see that, right? So there's lots of people like, oh, I don't know, you can care that much about a game. So as I said to my daughter, whether you feel that way or not, you have to understand this is genuine grief. The people in this region, I don't even live in Buffalo, but this is Bills country here for sure, right? There is now this history of just having hopes crushed and being tantalizingly close. That affects people. That has a material effect on a population. And to see the NFL just piss all over that, and in fact, manufacture that hurt, is really, like I said, disgusting and something I just can't support anymore. It's not because my team didn't win, right? And I think part of the reason why people are not, because there is a lot of outrage around this. There's a lot of commentary around this, and it's louder after last night than it typically has been. It's not just the fan base of the team that lost that's saying this. It's not just people crying about it, right? It's coming from more and more sources. But I think the reason why a lot of the commentary around the game from like former players and professional analysts and the sports networks, all the talk shows, is still more excited about what the Chiefs pulled off is because there is a sense that, well, they likely would have won anyway, right? So it's a combination of things with that game. It isn't just that the Bills got robbed. It's that the Bills got robbed and again, they were inflicting harm on themselves at the coaching level. And then for whatever reason, the quarterback, even though there were some amazing plays, I mean, the guy and his teammates, there were some catches in that game that you're like, whoa, like, my God, like, how did you do that? And yet here we are. And so I would ask you, to consider, I would urge you to ask yourself and consider if sports, not necessarily football, but something else, means this much to you, that it will cause you pain and grief if it doesn't go the way you hope. Is there a way for you to engage with it without feeling like without taking all that on as your burden, right? Because if I got to say anything to Josh Allen, I would say thank you and all those players. Thank you for all that hard work, for really putting yourself on the line. I mean, look, I don't care how much these people get paid. They make a tremendous sacrifice. Yes, it's a privilege to quote unquote play a game for a living, and a massive living at that. But football in particular is punishing on the body. And no amount of millions can really compensate for the level to which you're going to feel discomfort and potential handicaps later in life, right? This is a thing. Now, I think if you asked 99% of those guys, if you showed them footage of them in the future suffering physically, they'd be like, fuck it, I'm doing it anyway. Yes, sign me up. I don't care. There's a certain warrior mentality that these guys have, that they want to put themselves at this risk, right? So great. But when you sign up for this sport, you are hoping to get to a point where you can etch your name in history. And the downside to that is the risk that you will fail, or quote unquote fail, or come up short, and that will be your legacy, your epitaph will be that you couldn't deliver. That is the bargain that you enter into when you play professional sports. You hope to be in a position that Josh Allen has been in, with the quote unquote the ball in his hand, literally, right? With the opportunity to win. This is what little kids fantasize about in the backyard when they're throwing a ball around. And that's his destiny, not ours. We don't own these people's wins and losses. We don't own their victories. And I think that's a really unhealthy thing that we do with athletes and with musicians who we pour all this adulation into. It's like, they're not our property. They're not doing this for you, if you think about it, right? And we have to separate a little. It's like, well, look, this is his karma. This is his relationship with his own success. It has nothing to do with me, right? And so while I would absolutely thank him and the rest of the team, I mean, James Cook, there are a number of other players. Matt Milano, Oh my goodness. I mean, that just made incredible, incredible plays. And they're giving it their all. It's not like they're like not trying. They're doing everything they can. Right? Just like digging their hands in this horse, like trying to get it, wrangle it into finally being able to cross this finish line, and they couldn't. Right? I have nothing but admiration for that. I think it's kind of gross to sit on your ass, eating chicken and drinking. I wasn't drinking beer. I was drinking ginger beer, but stuffing my face, expecting these people to deliver on my behalf. So I have nothing but hats off. And man, I feel for them, because if I felt as bad as I did this morning or in the middle of the night, I woke up actually a few times and it's like, oh, that's right. Wait, I have this feeling something awful happened. Oh, that's right. It was that bad. I cannot imagine what they are waking up this morning feeling like. I cannot imagine that. That is awful. And I have nothing but empathy. My heart goes out to them. But that's your existential burden. You chose that path, right? And we all have to look at this as a two-way street and go, wait, what is mine and what isn't here, both for better and for worse, right? And can you live with engaging with this sport and following it when now okay, there's like three things pushing against what you're hoping for? Is it a worthy basket for you to put your hope in? And I mean, that's something every person has to answer. But as it becomes more and more clear, and as we face these really high-level stresses elsewhere in life, right, all around us, the stakes seem to be going up higher and higher and higher. And this is where it sounds like I'm contradicting what I said before. I mean, we do have to decide where to invest our attention, especially when there are things that are urgently calling for our attention. And so it'd be one thing if, like, okay, California and the West Coast is on fire, right? Artificial intelligence is just barreling forward and it'll just end up wherever it ends up. And it seems like we can't really do much to manage, how that's going to turn out. All sorts of other stuff that is like, whoa, we've got to stop and think here. Like, where are we going? It'd be one thing if the structure of the sport was honest and we could turn to that and go, okay, well, I'm going to take my mind off this for a few hours and look at that. But in a system, in like an infrastructure that is like doing everything it can short of reaching out of the TV and smacking you in the face and laughing at you, do we need to reassess? Wait, where's my attention going? I love sports talk. I've been listening to sports talk like pretty religiously for, over a decade at this point. I cannot get enough sports talk. And today I've decided, I already cheated a little bit, but it's like, I'm not going to listen over and over and over and over and over and over and over to all this noise around a bunch of noise, right? If you present something honestly, like the WWE and the WWF, like pro wrestling, where it's like, okay, this is fun, this is a script, this is totally cooked up for our entertainment. If you present that honestly, then it's like, all right, can you watch this stuff with that attitude? That kind of defeats the whole point of organized sport, though. Organized sport is supposed to be a meritocracy. It's supposed to be those that made the right decisions and executed and took the right actions are the ones who won. Not, oh, there's a hand on the scale and oh my God, it's pressing really, really hard in favor of the Chiefs. And this has been going on all season. Actually, this dates back to the last Super Bowl the Chiefs were in with the Philadelphia Eagles 2 Super Bowl appearances ago. the Super Bowl ended on a penalty call, which is unheard of. It's like they didn't even let the whole game play out. They basically gifted the Chiefs the game where the Eagles would have had another drive. This is not last season, it's the year before, right? And it's like, what the fuck? Why would you do that to your own product when you're number one with a bullet in American sports? The NFL is a juggernaut. It is seemingly unstoppable. However, hubris and overexpansion and corruption will bring it down eventually. It will stumble. It will fall on its face. And I hope the people responsible for those decisions last night, whether they were malicious or not, and I think it's naive to presume that they weren't. Okay, fuck Occam's razor. Like not presuming malicious or self-interested or nefarious intent and presuming naivete instead is just absolutely dumb, given what we know about people, especially when there's money involved. But I hope the people responsible, I hope there is a kind of hell for them. I hope that they're choking on feeling gross about this. I don't know that they are. I mean, I don't know how you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you don't feel some like lingering kind of niggling feeling of, oh, well, we got helped where we didn't need it at all. Right? Maybe when you play pro sports, you've seen enough bad calls that you can rationalize it yourself. Oh, it can go either way. And today there's going to be all sorts of like former athletes are going to go, oh, that's not why they lost the game. That didn't decide the game. Actually, it fucking did. Right? I know I was saying before the Chiefs might have won anyway, but as things played out, let's put it this way. We don't know if it decided the game because we can't compare it to a parallel like reality where the game would have gone down a different course. But we can say those were decisive moments that killed momentum, literally stalled it for the one team and not the other. And we can say that, boy, these calls sure have a way of piling up in favor of this one team, regardless of the overall statistics. It's when the calls take place. It's not the volume of calls, right? So I just fuck all that noise, and it's so strange too to see former players just jock riding Patrick Mahomes. Now, he is amazing. He is Michael Jordan-esque. But from people who played in a sport where they are ultra competitive, to see them just riding this guy's jock, it's just not a good look, particularly when it's racialized, when you can tell there's a racial motive to claim Patrick Mahomes, who is racially mixed, and to really like pour all this extra energy into it on that basis. I mean, it's not something I can like put my finger on and say explicitly that's what's happening, but it's just a feeling, right? To see these guys like slobber all over him, like, he's the greatest, oh my God. It's like, come on, you played the game. Chill the fuck out. You know what I mean? So that's distasteful or not to my taste, and I'm just not having it. I'm just like as much as I love sports talk, as much as I love the Super Bowl is like one of my favorite days of the year, aside from my daughter's birthday and Christmas and Thanksgiving. I think the Super Bowl is in so many ways the most exciting American holiday, even though it's not technically a holiday. And the day after the Super Bowl, boy, I am like hooked on sports talk for like days on end. That whole week, especially if it was a great game, I cannot get enough. It's like, well, I've got to make room for something else. This is like how much are you going to get injured by someone or something, an institution, a relationship, before you say enough is enough? I withdraw, I retreat. Rock on. You're not doing this to me anymore. How much? Where do you get to that point? And the last thing I'll offer you is this. If you are feeling really devastated by this, and this was a truly devastating event, this is real grief. This is a psychic blow to an entire population of people. It's that bad. That game was that bad that painful. And again, to all you poo-pooers out there, you just don't understand how much this hurts. But if you are feeling that, I'll ask you what I was asking myself this morning. How can I direct that grief, and what can I do with it? How can I apply that feeling in a way that is constructive and useful? Now that I'm on that I felt that frequency vibration of despair and loss and mourning and real disappointment, real bubble bursting. There's almost like a childlike tone to it, right? Where you can remember those moments as a kid, those key moments in your life where something was shattered for you, right? If you're feeling that, if you're on that frequency right now, what can you do with that for the greater good? How can you go forward with that rather than just let it sit there and turn into something, kind of like emotionally infected, or like a kind of emotional infection that just stays with you and gets worse and worse and worse and festers? What do we do with it? There's an opportunity here, is what I'm saying, right? There are people who are feeling that as a matter of course in their lives that has nothing to do with this game. That's on a much heavier level that they're feeling that they're feeling all those things: disappointment, heartbreak, betrayal, grief, loss, mourning, right? And hopelessness, despair. Well, now we can relate to those people, to anyone experiencing that. And maybe there's a way to be constructive with this. My answer is to really try to give attention and give of myself and give my energy as little as possible to this entire system of a sports league and all the noise around it, all the attention generating that it does, and all the people talking about it that don't pay back what we put in. They just take, almost like they're feeding on all of that heartbreak, right? It's one thing if the team wins and loses on its own merits. It's another thing when you're intruding on the process and you're now actively, maliciously hurting people and then profiting off of that. That is disgusting. That's like harvesting our sorrow, to borrow from Metallica there, right? That's gross. So what do we do? Be curious to know what you think. What do you do? What is your ritual maybe? Do you have one? Do you have steps you take after? I mean, as I'm doing this, the sun is shining beautifully here, right? I went for a walk with my daughter this morning. We went to her music lesson and I really paid attention. I was present, made a point to be present. That's important. Maybe that's the silver lining here, is that this kind of thing reshuffles your chakras in a way that you have to ask. You have to make a choice as to where you're going to put your energy. And you can then choose to be more present for those that need you, for those whom you would rather didn't feel those experiences of heartbreak, for those people that you can be the Josh Allen hero just by being there for them, right? So there's all sorts of ways to go with this. I'm still unsure and unclear. I hope I can stick to just looking at pro football and being well, I may, watch here and there and just enjoy the sportsman, the athleticism of it and the gamesmanship of it, but not gonna sit there hoping when it's clear that your hope is being dashed on purpose to some degree, right? To a significant degree. Can you live with that? Can you continue to stay in that relationship? I would love it if this erupted in some kind of scandal and people just started divesting in football and it took a fucking huge nosedive like overnight. I would love that. I would love it if they got shocked, if they got cold water thrown in their fucking faces and they were like, whoa, we thought we were in the number one driver's seat position and now we're screwed by our own hand. I would love that. I would love it if there was a refereeing scandal that surfaced much like it did in the NBA years ago in pro basketball. We'll see. But look, if you're reeling from this, if you're hurting, my heart goes out to you. You'll survive. You know? But I mean, I understand. I feel you on that. And I understand this is very hard and it brings up some questions and some choices that hopefully lead you to where you need to go. So for Feedback Def, I'm Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Over and out.